West Steelberry is President and CEO of the Winthrop Rockefeller Foundation, a private, independent foundation whose mission is to improve the lives of the Arkansans in three interrelated areas: economic development, education, and economic, racial, and social justice. The foundation has granted nearly $147 million over 4 decades to build and sustain organizations that serve and strengthen Arkansas. She is credited with crafting and implementing the foundation's bold, strategic, and sustained plan, which is titled Moving the Needle, creating an agenda to bring about systemic change throughout the state. Having earned her bachelor's degree from Bowie State University of Maryland and her master's degree from the University of Michigan Gerald R. Ford School of Public Policy, Dr. West Steelberry was awarded a PhD in Public Policy from the University of Maryland. As part of her educational experience, she participated in fellowship programs with the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation Policy Institutes and with Emerging Leaders, a joint program with Duke University and the University of Cape Town in South Africa. Interestingly, Cherise says that she did not have professional goals. When asked why she chose philanthropy, her answer is that philanthropy chose her. She states, and I quote, "I have a mission and a vision to use my time, talent, and treasure to transform vulnerable communities into healthy, vibrant communities. I'm willing to do that in any capacity. Philanthropy is my current path." Involved in philanthropy for over 20 years, Dr. West Steelberry served as CEO at the Foundation for Louisiana as a program associate at the Annie E. Casey Foundation. Her professional career includes nearly 30 years of experience in community development, public policy and advocacy, and public service. In 2010, Dr. West Steelberry was named Distinguished Scholar in Residence for the Center of Community Philanthropy at the University of Arkansas Clinton School of Public Service Center. In addition to running the Winthrop Rockefeller Foundation, she is active in a number of nonprofits and philanthropy organizations, including the Association of Black Foundation Executives, Bank of the Ozarks, the National Committee for Responsive Philanthropy, Rural Policy Research Institute for Rural Entrepreneurship, tried to say that 3 times, and Arkansas Women's Leadership Forum. She is a graduate of the Arkansas State Chamber of Commerce's Leadership Arkansas class and a 2007 recipient of the Tully Award for her work as executive producer of the social documentary Power in the People. Arkansas Business Journal has listed her among the top 180 power lists 3 times, and she was awarded the 2013 Woman of Influence Award. In speaking with her staff, it sounds like Cherise emulates many of the same qualities as Hillary, Michelle, and Oprah. A great boss, passionate about her work, energetic, a morning person. Her most productive time is between 4 a.m. and 2 p.m., so we're good today. She's at the gym every morning, and she doesn't drink coffee. She has 2 dogs, which she adores, and her husband, who shares her passion for philanthropy through his work with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Cherise, you are now at the top of my dream list of dinner guests.
Thank you. Thank you. Good. Conference going well so far? Yes. Yeah, I know some of y'all don't eat lettuce for lunch. You can go to McDonald's later. They got a Chick-fil-A one way, and I saw Wendy's somewhere, a sign or something like that. I know some of you really want your hamburger. And I ain't mad at you for it either. I don't eat burgers, but I understand. So I am so grateful to be here, and thank you so much for this invitation. When Pam and Janice called me and provided me with some of the feedback and things you guys would be talking about and would like to talk about, much of it centered on leadership. So if you would indulge me, what I would like to do is talk to you all about leadership and talk to you about Nehemiah. Now, for those who don't know, because I know there's some in the room who probably don't know who Nehemiah was, Nehemiah, there's a whole book in the Bible about him, and Nehemiah, he is one of my favorites. So I love the book of Ruth because I love the love story. I love James because James is a man after my own heart. He said, I only need a couple paragraphs to tell you to act right. I don't need 4 to 5 verses, I don't need a whole bunch, right? Get straight to the point. Here's what you need to do. Nehemiah is a community builder. He is one who had a heart and a passion for his community, and he did what it took to make things happen. So, for those who don't know, Nehemiah, his book, it continues the story of Israel and their return to return from Babylonian captivity. And he had it on his heart to build a wall. So he was in Persia at the time, and he heard that the temple was being rebuilt. And he knew for the temple to be successful, he knew that for that surrounding area for it to be successful, they needed a wall. It needed to be fortified. So to support the work of the temple building, he had it on his heart to fortify that work by rebuilding the wall for protection. And so, when he got this, he grew very anxious when he heard this temple was being built, and he asked God, he said to God, what can I do? What should I do? And God answered his call and said, you go rebuild that temple. Rebuild the wall. And in rebuilding the wall, God laid it on the heart of the Persian king to not only give him permission to build the wall, but also to supply him with the materials. He actually gave him money and support to do so. And also, he gave Nehemiah some time off. Nehemiah was his cupbearer. Gave him some time off, he asked for some time off. It only took him 52 days to rebuild that wall, but gave him some time off. And in giving him some time off, made him governor of that province. Okay? So, why is Nehemiah important here? Oh, I also need to say that when Nehemiah began building that wall and had it on his heart to build that wall, of course, the rumor went out that he was coming to rebuild the wall. And what happens when you go to do something good? Somebody bad comes along. And so a whole bunch of folks then start planning, scheming to then thwart his effort to rebuild that wall. And in spite of all that, in spite of all that opposition, in spite of all the accusations and everything, that wall got built. Now, Nehemiah is important because building that wall was a tremendous task, was a great feat, and you make this announcement that you're going to rebuild the wall. He goes to meet his fellow folks and say, we're going to rebuild that wall, and then they don't act right. Because they're like, well, how are we going to rebuild the wall? We don't have time to rebuild that wall. People don't even want us to rebuild the wall. So, you go to do something good, you got the supplies, you got the support from one area, and then the folk you're trying to work on behalf of don't act right. Sounds familiar? Okay. And so he was able to inspire those folks to give him tithes, money, to give him support, to give them their time and talent to rebuild that wall. So Nehemiah was quite the leader. One, to even have the courage to leave his palace because he was the cupbearer. As cupbearer, that means he was hanging out with the king. That means he had nice clothes, probably a nice home to go to, probably wore nice clothing, had nice surroundings around him. So he left the comfort of his own palace to go do this work. The courage to even hear and get a call laid upon his heart that he went to do it. And then to do so knowing that before you even get there, folk are plotting to stop what you're doing. So he, as a leader, he's important to me, I think, important to study. So in this community here, in Mahoning Valley, you guys are working on building your community. You all are the community builders. And in doing so, you have this vision. You have a mission that has been placed on a vision or something that's been placed in your heart to transform this community into a vibrant, beautiful community where there's arts and culture, where there's quality housing, where there's quality education, where families thrive, where families that are here love their homes and even attract business and commerce here so that the economy can grow and more families come. So you have a beautiful vision for your community. And in this region, the children and families, they're dependent upon you to get this work done. So in preparation for this meeting, you said you want to embrace diversity, respect the history, ensure that young people stay, make sure that you create a community where you can raise your families. So Nehemiah means comfort. It means Jehovah comforts. And Nehemiah, he mourned and he prayed over the conditions of his homeland. Just as many of you have a heart for Mahoning Valley, and you too are praying for your community. So this is why Nehemiah provides a fine study on leadership, and specifically transformational leadership. Now, I don't want to compete or make any suggestion that one style of leadership is better than another. But what I do find is in social justice, when you're working in a social justice area, whether you're at the YMCA, whether you're working in the domestic violence shelter, whether you're working with youth development, whether you're working in any area of social justice, that social justice heart, when you have that social justice heart, it immediately implies that you want to transform lives, that you want to use your time, your talent, your treasure to do transformation. So transformational leadership may be a leadership style or approach that you consider. You're already doing it. You're already there. So what my charge here is to want to affirm what you're already doing. And then to ask the question, or ask yourselves, how do we recreate all of you? And how are we being intentional about creating that leadership? How are we being intentional about ensuring that that social justice focus stays as a part of the work that needs to be done here in Mahoning Valley? So I want to talk with you a bit about that. So a transformational leader, as the name implies, it is not one of those leaders that just comes in, sweeps in, and does his or her thing and then comes back out. A transformational leader is one that's committed, one that's here for the long haul. A transformational leader, as Nehemiah showed, is one whose style is focused on team building, that we're all in this together. And in our own disciplines, in our own areas of work, in what we do, we're all coming together for a greater good, a greater cause. In leadership, we get so caught up in our individual silos and what we're doing individually that we don't actually step back to see how all of our collective activity is to feed into a set of goals, that's to feed into a mission, that's to support the vision, and the vision of a Mahoning Valley that is conducive for raising kids and families and where we all want to live and thrive. We want folks fighting to get to Mahoning Valley. Like, if you don't live here, then you're not living in the right spot. That's the vision. And so we all have to work together to get to that vision. Well, a transformational leader motivates folks to get there. A transformational leader builds teams. A transformational leader is really focused in on ensuring that all of the parts, all of us, are honored and valued in what we do to get us to our ultimate vision. So there are some aspects of transformational leadership that I want to talk with you guys about. But to recruit, retain, develop your leaders, that's the question. How are we doing this so that we can consistently have that resident engagement that Jennifer talked about earlier? How are we ensuring that? And it is about having programs. It is about having the entrepreneur programs that you have. It is about the programs to build nonprofit leader. It is about those programs, but you know what? It's also individual commitment. It is about mentoring. It's about succession planning. It is about being intentional about grooming and working with those that have the elements, the qualities of transformational leadership. So that's the level or where I want to see us consider or think about. So again, you're already doing this. I'm just asking that you be intentional. So what are some elements of it? One element of it is mission. Nehemiah had a mission. His mission was to build that wall. He stayed focused on that mission regardless of what was happening in and around him. That mission was important to him. Mission is important to all of our organizations. But in what ways are we ensuring that our mission is feeding into the whole? And when we stay focused on our mission, no one can move us or guide us around that because we're so focused on it. And when you stay focused on your mission, you actually instill stability, you actually instill order, you actually instill confidence. Because when you're mission-minded and you stay focused on that mission and you have some successes within that mission, then people want to join and be a part of what you're doing. So with Nehemiah being our example, Again, Nehemiah, he was the cupbearer. He was in a palace. He lived in a nice place. And he left that place because he was totally 100% committed to that cause. And that cause, in his case, was rebuilding that wall. Many of you in this room could be at Fortune 500 companies. Many of you in this room could be entrepreneurs making a whole lot more money than you're making. I'm sure that you probably have some friends who are in these big corporations and you're only making $80,000 a year and they making $200,000 and you're like, oh man, you know what? I wonder if I submit my resume, what would happen? But again, we stay focused. We come back and we say, no, 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 these folk need me. No, 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 I'm about this mission. It would be nice, and I have nothing against Fortune 500 companies. It would be nice to do that work there, but I have been called to do this. And I will do this, to stay focused on it. Now, that doesn't mean that when they call you and that recruiter's like, you know, you can come over here and you can. You say, no, that's all right. Mission focused. Mission focused. This work was hard, as your work is hard. They had to make bricks. They had to lay bricks. I mean, they had to sweat. I mean, dude was building a wall while he also had a sheet in his pocket. Because at any given time, somebody was going to come along and stop their efforts. So he building a wall with one hand and got a machete in the other hand. Okay? Now that is someone who is focused, because that means they're willing to fight. I'm going to build this thing, but I mean I'm going to fight off any and everything that stops me from getting this done. Again, Nehemiah being that example, but think about your own example. How focused are you on your mission? Everyone in this room can say that, but how do we grow that in others? How do we grow that in others? That becomes one of the questions. So, in that, I also want to say that in doing his work and accomplishing his goals, he also had a plan. He had a plan. And we get to going on stuff and know what our mission is without a doggone plan. And following that plan. So consider your own selves and your mission. And again, getting to the whole of creating a vibrant, positive community here. In what ways are we using our individual missions to get us to the whole? Where is that plan, that overall plan? So I just wanted to make sure that we understand that being mission-minded and mission-focused is key to answering the question, am I my brother's keeper? The answer is yes. Ubuntu means I am because you are. That we all care about humanity. It is the understanding that when someone is homeless, and you pass someone homeless on the street, that actually affects what happens to you in your own home. Not only does it affect you in terms of the hurt and the pain and the moral aspect of it that you feel for that person being homeless, but also the more homelessness you have, the more need for social services you have. The more need for social services you have, the more need for taxes that you have. The more need for taxes that you have, the more that comes out of your pocket. So while you may think you can ignore someone who is down and out, it actually at some point affects you in some way or another. Ubuntu means that we're responsible for that homeless person, that we're actually responsible for that orphan, that we're actually responsible for that young child, that Latino or African American young brother who is struggling to read on grade level. That we're all responsible. Because if he doesn't read well on grade level, we all knows what happened later. We actually lose him along the way in terms of education. When we lose him along the way in education, then that means he doesn't prepare well for career college. If he doesn't prepare well for career college, that means he's not a productive part of our labor force. We lose human capital. When we lose human capital like that en masse, then that means that we have a whole level of entrepreneurship, a whole level of taxes, a whole level of contributions that are not being made to build the economy of Mahoning Valley. So that third grader today has an impact on what happens 15 years from now. We are all responsible for that. And so that's what Ubuntu means. That principle, that thing, we are all responsible for one another. We're all responsible for one another. Ebola, while it may seem like it's some obscure disease right now in Africa, a whole lot can happen. But again, when we lose the economy there because we're losing people there, And when there's civil unrest there, then that then has ripple effects all across the world, not just in that one space. And finding a cure and finding a way, again, in morality, to be of support, because it is not, if we have technology and a skill and a know-how to help folks, we should do so. And that's the moral imperative. But the economic imperative is, if we lose a whole nation of folks, then we lose a whole nation that builds our global economy. Building that global economy has an impact on what happens here in Mahoney Valley. So what happens there happens here. We're all in this together. That's Ubuntu. And so here, this aspect of it, and teaching that aspect of it, I was actually talking to Bill Elaine earlier, and if you haven't had the opportunity to talk with him, he's actually quite brilliant. He looks unassuming, but he actually is quite brilliant. And what he said to me, was, you know, one of the challenges that we have here is that folk aren't seeing the big picture. That we can use our individual missions to feed into the whole, but we stay so focused on self and what it means for self that we don't get out of that to look at the whole. And so that's where Ubuntu comes in. If you actually have that mind, that mission, if we all think in that way, that it's not about self and self-preservation, but working towards the whole, then we move forward in transforming our communities. And so for Nehemiah, in his case, he saw that to protect that temple, for that temple to exist, for us to support the building of that temple, my role in this is to fortify the wall, to make sure that wall gets built. He also partnered with Ezra, who was responsible for the spiritual development of folks. So Nehemiah saw that all these pieces came together to rebuild our community, but his part of it was the wall. So that's Ubuntu. Another aspect of this is excellence. And this is probably more it's for all of us, but even for the young people, I want to direct this towards excellence. So Nehemiah, by the time he got the assignment from God and took it on to say yes to rebuilding that wall, he knew what he was doing. He actually had the skills, the talent, the ability to do it. He may not have known how to build bricks by the time he got to needing to build those bricks, but he learned to build those bricks. He built that wall in 52 days. Again, a level of excellence. He had a level of proficiency. Sometimes we dive right into this work without building our own capacities, without knowing what it is that we need to do, what we need to be. And that level of excellence becomes important because people are wanting excellence from us. Excellence isn't a word that we think of. We think of effective, we think about efficiencies, we think about doing good work, but are we really stepping back and saying, is what we're doing and how we're contributing excellent? Again, excellence instills confidence. Excellence instills and gets people to join your cause. Excellence is important just to be excellent. And it's not something that we think a whole lot about. So when we build our boards, for example, are we really building these boards with excellence? I tell you, with my grantees and in doing this work in nonprofits, if y'all keep putting your cousins and them on that doggone board, it's going to drive me up the wall. If they can't raise money, they shouldn't be on the board. Okay? If they can't raise money, they should not be on that board. If you weren't able to assess how well your organization is doing to meet its goals and mission, then you need to step back because you don't even know if you're excellent. Do you even know that you're excellent? Can you tell your story in such a way that you are not only accountable to your board, your staff, and the like, but you're accountable to the general public? In what ways are you transparent and accountable and showing the excellent work that you do? Are you even telling your stories well? How do we even know that you're excellent? How do yourselves even know you're excellent? And we don't step back and ask that question. But in transformational leadership, you have to know if you are doing well, but well is not enough. It has to be a level of excellence. These folk are depending upon us to get those houses built. These folk are dependent upon us to ensure that arts and culture is permeated throughout this community. Folks are depending upon us to ensure that we have positive education outcomes, Doing that halfway is not doing anybody any good. It has to be excellent, and excellence is what we need to strive for. Now, I didn't say perfect, because perfect is too much stress, but excellence is achievable. So something to consider in transformational leadership. Integrity. Now, integrity is also something that is one that we don't step back and think about. So, in rebuilding that wall, Nehemiah, who, used to be well-dressed, hanging out, drinking before the king did, chilling with the king, talking about, man, let me drink this before you do, you know what I'm saying? And probably ate well and all that good stuff. He goes from that to being a man who is dirty, sweaty, organizing folks, trying to get them to give their money, their time, their talent to build this wall. He is then arguing with folk because half of them don't want to build the wall because they don't see the purpose, because they themselves are so downhearted that they don't see that fortifying this wall is important to this community. Because they themselves are downhearted. They've been raided so many times now, the Babylonian invasion, and so many folks have raided them so much that they're hurt. Okay? And on top of that, he then got to argue with the folk, the Samballots and them, who are trying every other day to figure out how they're going to tear him down. Brother had a lot going on. But he never lost his integrity. He remained so focused. He remained so excellent. He remained so committed to his objective that he did not lose his integrity. In fact, it was his integrity that helped him to be such an effective organizer in the first place. And it was his integrity and his staying committed to his vision that enabled him to be effective. Again, similar to excellence, with our integrity, we have to ensure that as we are building our metaphorical walls, because we should not be building walls that keep people out, so I'm not saying walls in that way, but as we build our metaphorical walls, meaning as we're doing our building, let's make sure we do that with such integrity. Such integrity. Again, because everyone's depending upon us. Also, in depending upon us, the integrity of how dollars are spent, the integrity about how you speak about the work, the integrity in which you go about the work, the example that you set becomes so important in motivating and building, that integrity just becomes one of those things that we lose so much in leadership. And it's that quality of being honest, it's that quality or that state of being where you are whole and undivided. There is nothing that will tear you away from what it is that you need to do, and doing that with the utmost of integrity. In addition, when he built that wall lasted a good long time. So it's not just the integrity of us as leaders, but the integrity of what it is that we're trying to build, and making sure that it in and of itself is strong and can withhold any opposition. Grace. Now, being a leader of grace and showing graciousness in your leadership, now y'all know that just like Nehemiah, who had no folk, who was trying to sabotage his work and was getting on his nerves, that he had to extend grace. We have to extend grace because, this work is hard, and we're all trying to do this together, and half of y'all in the room don't act right half the time. But nonetheless, I got to keep working with you. Similarly, I probably don't act right half the time, and you got to keep working with me. Extending that grace and learning to be a leader of grace becomes important. If not, being a jerk does not help the cause any. Won't get you a whole lot of funding, won't get you a whole lot of other people to follow you. It will just thwart your ability to be effective. So grace isn't something that we talk about a lot in leadership. Again, these are elements that I'm suggesting that we consider in this work. And I use terminology like grace. When you look at the literature, they actually have a more fancy word. But for me, it is about grace, extending grace, receiving grace. But there's some aspects of being a grace-filled leader that I wanted to share. Grace-filled leaders, they emphasize principles rather than rules. Rules modify behavior, but principles actually change hearts. So one way you emphasize principles, valuing people. You know, it's easy to view people as a means to success on our teams, but if people feel they're cared for and valued in who they are, then we will get their hearts and their loyalty. So consider valuing people. Push towards excellence. Leaving room for failure. As gracious leaders, we know our own shortcomings and failures. But when we push towards excellence and leave room for failure, this gives us the ability to push people towards success while allowing them to make mistakes, because mistakes will be made. Failures will be done. Shortcomings will happen. But again, extending that, being a grace-filled leader. Allows different opinions while promoting commonalities. One of the things I've learned in Arkansas, in my work in Arkansas and my work in Louisiana, was that we all want the same thing. We really all want the same thing. We want those third graders to read on grade level. We want to stop domestic violence, and that's only because Ray Rice and all that is so prevalent for me in my mind right now. But we want to stop that. We want to ensure that those who are batterers have the skills, the ability to deal with their anger in positive ways and not destroy their families. We want to ensure that those who have been formerly incarcerated are welcomed back into our community and have a way to go about it. So we all want the same things, but we get jacked up because we all approach it differently. We all approach it differently. Everybody has, whether you're Tea Party, conservative, Democrat, black, white, Native American, poor, all your life, or born wealthy. We all want to be, it's the different ways that get us caught up. How do we do this in such a way that we get to commonality? You still have your view and opinion, I still have mine, but we stay focused on what we need to get to. That is hard to do. It is so hard to do, but it is so necessary because we need each other. We need each other to make the changes we need to make. Low-income folk who are isolated in their communities need those who have means and access to influential leaders and decision makers. We need to bridge that gap between the two. Because for that isolated community to get the resources it needs to behave or be different means that they have to have access to those who have the dollars and the ability to influence change there. Otherwise, they stay isolated and not understanding why nobody invests, and those other folks stay over there wondering why the other folk won't do right in their communities. We have to bridge those gaps. We just have to figure out how to do that. And focusing in on our commonalities. A grace-filled leader does that, focuses in on the commonalities. Another is to believe the best. That we all want the same things and we want the best for our communities. We have different approaches, different opinions, but believing that we all want the best and working from that point of view is a grace-filled leader. And then another one is the willingness to be abused. Again, looking at Nehemiah, he got it from all sides. He got it from the folk that he was trying to do right by, and he got it from the folk outside of that community. The willingness to be abused. Now, what do I mean by that willingness to be abused? Well, you guys know what that is. And as leaders, we often have to acquiesce. We often have to do on behalf of. We often have to serve. And sometimes in being that and doing that, they mistake that for weakness or mistake that for not being strong, when really you're just trying to move the process along. So in some cases you do have to fail, and in some cases you do have to be abused. But that willingness to be abused, not that willingness to be taken advantage of or that willingness to be misused, but that willingness to say, okay, I'm going to take this hit or two because it's for the greater good. This work is hard. It is hard. I have gotten in my car and gone to communities, met with folk, got back in my car and cried my eyes out. Because even if I gave them every single dollar I had at the Winthrop Rockefeller Foundation, they could, that community was so far gone, I didn't know what to do about it. And oftentimes in our work, we take on all of that stress, all of that comes with being leaders in this work. But you have to take time out for yourselves. If for nothing else, to examine whether you're being excellent. If for nothing else, examine your own effectiveness. Step back and say, what am I doing? How is this building to the whole? How is this getting us to our vision? How am I showing up as a leader? Where is my grace? Where is my excellence? Where is my integrity? You can't do all of these things all the time if you don't take time out for yourself and assess. And renew yourselves. Actually, take time out and read. Take time out and knit. Play a dumb video game with your kids. Actually, take time out for yourselves, because we need leaders. We need you guys working and toiling, but we don't need you toe up from the flow up. We need you to be healthy. We need you to smile. We need you to continue to motivate. Now, what would it be like if you're trying to motivate and encourage another young leader or someone in your community to do something, and you all down in the net, and you got black circles around your eyes, and don't look like you comb your hair 4 days? I mean, that's not going to motivate too much of anybody to do anything. So you have to take time out for yourself, sometimes to reflect and to consider the leadership and consider how you're getting to those broader goals. But also, it's important to you in terms of your own physical being and your own spiritual and mental well-being. Take time out for yourselves. And then the last one is to rejoice. Even the smallest success, celebrate it. And sometimes you have to celebrate that yourself at your desk. Because ain't nobody else going to pat you on the back for it. But take time out to celebrate, rejoice, be happy, enjoy. Again, we need everybody to show up in such a way that you are encouraging others to be a part of your mission and your goals. You have to rejoice, you have to celebrate, if not for yourself, for the whole. You'd be surprised at how much pizza makes people happy. I mean, just having a pizza party, and just small ways in which you can just say, job well done. Be an encourager to someone else. Be that person that says, we have come this far, or we have accomplished this task. Now, is poverty eradicated in Mahoning Valley? No, it's not. But did we take a small step forward? Yes, we did. And that should be celebrated and recognized. So those are some aspects there of transformational leadership. Now there's one other part in this, in the Nehemiah story, that I want to talk about, and then I'm done. So Nehemiah, the wall was built. The wall was built because he was an excellent organizer. The wall was built, he was a man of integrity, as we talked about. The wall was built because he showed extended grace, gave grace and extended grace, mission-focused, mission-minded, and the like. So all those elements of a transformation leader. The wall was built in 52 days. Nehemiah then went back to work because the deal was with the king that he does the wall, get everything straight, and then you come back. So he went back. Then he went back 12 years later, and do y'all know what happened? People was acting like fools up in there. He was so mad. Let me give you a quote. Let me see if I can find out what it, okay. So after 12 years, he returned to find the wall strong. So the wall was fortified, had a lot of integrity. The wall was strong, right? The wall was good. The people weren't. And he didn't mince words. He says, I argued with those people, put curses on them, hit some of them, and pulled out their hair. He was a little upset. He'd probably go to jail if he tried to do that right now, right? But you know, you do this work and you work so hard, and then you're like, oh my God, no, I didn't do all this work, and you, oh no, you, for real? And you would want to just take some, snatch him up, right? What happened was, he didn't pay attention to developing leaders to come after him. And that's the point I want to make today. You have to develop the leaders to come after you. You have to do so. And what he did not do, that intentionality. He was a great organizer. He had the skill set to get that wall built. He was able to motivate them to give the money, the time, the talent to do so. He had the ability to get that wall built and negotiate with the Persian king, because the Jews at that time were so upset at how high those taxes were. They was like, man, we ain't doing that damn wall. Look, I need you to do something about my taxes, okay? Because I'm tired of paying all these taxes up in here, and you go back to the king and tell him about my taxes. You tell him about my taxes, then I'm to build your wall. Because we know people in the community negotiate, right? If you do this, I'll do that, right? It's all about that. He went, negotiated them taxes so he can get some of them folk to get on the wall. He did all of that. I mean, so Nehemiah was a bad man. But he did not pay attention to building leadership after he left. And that's what I'm trying to get you guys to think about today during our Q&A or during the table talks, is that question. That wall, he left there, did a good thing, it didn't continue. Because, you know, when you guys come back 12 years later, some gentleman earlier was saying he was retiring, and I don't know if he's here right now, but he comes back to his organization 12 years later, and he might stand in the middle of the floor and be arguing with folk, putting curses on them, hitting them, and pulling their hair. Because that leadership, he didn't think through about really establishing that true leadership before he left. So, you know, I just wanted to leave that. This other piece I want to leave with you too, and then I'll take my seat. And that is, we focus so much on today with us building those temples, with us building that wall. You all realize that wall may not be built by us. We want it to be built by us, but it may not be built by us. So again, focusing in on our goal, our role right now today is to build the foundation so that it can continue to be built. So King David had in his heart to build a temple. King David never did get that temple built. Solomon did. And it's referred to as Solomon's temple. But King David laid the foundation for Solomon to be successful. So as we think about our work today and our leadership and what we're doing to transform this community, we may not see those temples built as we want to see them right now. We may not get there in terms of getting the wall built. Now, I'm not saying that to discourage anyone, because some of you are you about to put the cornerstone in, and that's excellent, okay? And that's right. But, and I'm talking again metaphorically about buildings now. Whatever your area is, domestic violence may not be wiped out. Poverty may not be wiped out. Grade level reading, adult literacy may still be higher than you want it to be. But even if it get down 10% during your tenure, you have made some steps forward. Build that foundation in such a way that whomever comes after you, whoever you leave behind, can build upon it. Build it in such a way that they know how to raise money. They have the relationships to raise the money that they need. They have a good, solid fundraising plan and infrastructure in place. Build it so that the organization is ran in such a way that people want to work there. And people want to do the work because your leadership was so excellent that you just have tons of resumes that you're turning down. Build that kind of foundation. Tell the stories in such a way that others understand what you're trying to do, what you're achieving to get to the broader good. So leave that foundation. It may not be built in your time, it may not be built during your tenure, but make sure we leave a good, solid foundation. So again, the question is, how are we doing our leadership? How are we developing it, thinking consciously about it, intentionally, so that it perpetuates, so that we can, because the way that this community will be transformed is to make sure we have leaders that can do that transformational work even after we're gone. Thank you so much for your time.
Is a question and answer period. I'm going to ask Dr. Cherise West-Scalberry to come back up, and we're going to turn the tables a little bit. I'm going to facilitate some question and answer with Dr. West-Scalberry from questions that you generated by this discussion we've just had for a few minutes. So you had those guiding questions and principles on the gold sheet. I hope you took the opportunity to actually dig into what Dr. West-Scalberry had talked about and formulate a few questions. I hope you did that instead of just talking about the weather or what else. So I'm going to turn it on to you guys, and I know that we have a first question here. Maybe Denise, would you start off with a question? We had talked a little bit at our table about some of your topics, and if you shout it out, I'll repeat it until we get a handheld mic. Does that work?
That works.
Well, I found the Ubuntu idea very interesting, and it actually translates. Also, there is something in the Greek culture that's similar called Wean. And as we were talking, Jan mentioned that in the Jewish culture, they also have a sense of community and you're your brother's keeper. But there doesn't seem to be an Americanized version of that, with the melting pot. It seems like we all take care of our own cultures, but how can we translate that so that maybe tying into what Bill said, in that we don't seem to be all working together towards a common goal?
Do you want me to repeat that real quick? I'm sure some folks couldn't hear. So it was a commentary on the Ubuntu that Charisse had talked about, and how each culture has a similar sense or a similar feeling or a similar principle. But perhaps when we translate it to the States where we have this melting pot, it tends to be segmented. It's I'm taking care of my own group, and we all feel that way. But does it translate to additional groups, community-wide, or is it just, or is there a mechanism to help people understand how to apply that community-wide?
So that one is a tough one. And so there's a couple of things. If you guys can get John Powell, have you invited John Powell to one of these? John Powell is brilliant. And he's now at Stanford. He actually was one of the founders of the Kirwan Institute. He now has a whole area of study currently that is around creating community circles. And it's not, we've heard of community circles. You guys may even have a community circle here in Youngstown, the nonprofit. But what he's trying to do is talk about this work and make it applicable to communities like Youngstown, or smaller communities where we actually think about the totality of all that we're doing and how it affects our community as a whole. So I would suggest either, and I may be, and is Christine here? Christine, raise your hand. Christine? No? Okay. What I can do is get you the title of his book, and Jennifer, we can easily, well not easily, but depending upon his schedule, we can probably get him to come here. And he can do a whole training on just this. So I want to say that for you guys directly, that you actually do have a resource that you can draw upon in John Powell to talk about the Ubuntu. His is called Community Circles. Now, in terms of the U.S. and America generally, that is a tough nut to crack, because it is built on, grit and strength and my own and property ownership and the like. And so to change that culture, I have no idea how to do, or can give any advice on. What I can say is, if we adopt Ubuntu here in Youngstown, it can be a model for how others do the work. It's a mindset and an intentional leadership approach that can be done, but you just have to go about struggling to make it happen. And that's the real challenge there. Also, whenever you talk to someone, they do care about the same thing. I mean, it's rare that you would find someone who doesn't care about an orphan. I mean, it's rare. Now, there might be one or two, but it's rare. And it's rare that you find someone who doesn't have some care for the environment. It just may not be as important as something else is, But the issue is, how do we then bring together what's important to you with what's important to me, put our time together, and just make this place what it needs to be. And but it requires a mindset, and that mindset starts with individuals, and then branches out to communities. But you're right, I don't know of an American equivalent. I was sitting here trying to think of it, and I actually don't know of an American.
It exists in each culture, but...
Well, this is a relatively new culture. I mean, and a new, Greek have been around since Greek times, right? Their whole era named after them. And, the Greeks, the era, so they've been around a very long time and have thought about philosophies and approaches and life in ways that we haven't. So, yeah, native cultures have as well, but again, they're very ancient, and we're just relatively new, but new built on another set of principles, and the principle is individualism.
At our table. But the reality of that is, if we're going to be building new leaders, then we all need to connect better with one another. So beyond the wonderful opportunity that the Wean Foundation has given us today, what do you see happening in other communities so that established leaders and new leaders stay in closer contact, not just a once-a-year event, but something that's more regular? Are there any ideas out there that we can learn from?
So how can, I'm sorry, I just want to make sure everybody can hear. So how can organizations and current leaders communicate more often and perhaps more intently to make sure they're staying connected and aware of what is going on with each other to facilitate that future leader growth and support?
So I don't know of many that are doing it well. I do know that, I'm sure you guys have your, is it Rotary? Yeah. Rotary. Rotary, the Rotary in Little Rock, right? The Little Rock Rotary actually sets aside a set of tables during their lunch together where you can meet with your mentors or people meet together on various topics. And again, that happens monthly, and I know that they're intentional about doing it that way. So that's one example that I know of. I do not know of other communities. I know of many communities who are struggling with it, but not doing it. And again, this is where it's about intentionality. So I mentor some young women, and I enjoy it with some, and I don't enjoy it with others, because you can't mentor somebody that doesn't know everything, right? You don't need me. What are you calling me for? And so, y'all know what I'm talking about. But I set up monthly appointments. I make an intention to meet with them individually most of the times, often, because I want to take this very seriously. For me, if I'm asked, then I want to take it seriously. And I think it just becomes, again, a matter of intentionality and setting up a system that could work, where you could meet. Young people want to know what you do and how you got there and what they're struggling with and how can I make this happen, because there are folk who are hungry to do what you do, but they don't know how to connect with you, even if you have the desire to connect with them, but you just got to pull it together. You just got to pull it together. Again, that issue of intentionality, if you notice, it's a refrain, because we all have good intentions, right? We all want interns. How many people have wanted interns? They get the intern to the office and they got nothing for them to do. And then they don't have a good experience, because again, if you have to be intentional, you have this person there, and it's a good idea. We all know it's a great idea, but if we're not really feeding it or developing it or creating it in such a way that they get something out of it, then you've wasted time. And so, intentionality just becomes the key to it. It just does. So, and even in mentoring some of those young women I talked about, some of them might, anyway, I'm not going to go into that. That's a whole other session. And we only got 10 more minutes. But I'm like, stop, I don't want to let you go, but I can't, because, I don't know what will happen to you if I let you to the world by yourself.
Arising over and over again in your work with communities and community organizations. So,
in Arkansas, we have, just like you guys, just folk who our hearts are in the right place, committed, brilliant, talented, and one of the things I find, though, is their view or scope is so limited. Whether they haven't been to a conference or haven't read a recent book or article or haven't spoken to someone outside of their own way of thinking, just being so insular, resisting Facebook. You laugh, but it happens. Not knowing how to use social media well, not being savvy in it. It's just that being insular, isolated, but not even wanting to know that the world is bigger than Arkansas, and their thoughts and the like that are out there. So that's one challenge I find. Another challenge is, again, hiring friends and family members and people who are nice. I'm so tired of nice people. I need capable people who know how to do the job. Being nice is not a prerequisite to work. I take a curmudgeon if they can actually get the job done. You put them in the office and close the door and let them do what they do, and nobody bothers them. It's all good. So just hiring good, solid, capable people, but even having a pipeline of people to choose from is just very tough. So I find that a lot of our nonprofit leaders just struggle with teams and building their teams. A friend of mine, his name is Bill, I won't say his last name, but Bill gave me a call the other day, and he was talking about, he had 12 resumes, grammatical errors, misspellings, poorly written, just thrown together. And he was just very disappointed in that pool that he had to choose from. And again, that gets back to excellence in another way. And so, just that, and, raising money, because in Arkansas, once you get past WRF, which is us, the Walton Family Foundation, the Arkansas Community Foundation, you done exhausted pretty much all that there is in terms of the philanthropic community broadly. And so, thus, you have to depend upon individuals and raising dollars in support, not from big foundation grants, but from individuals. And, developing and creating those structures to do so, and do so over the long term effectively, is another challenge. So that the talent is a challenge, being insular and isolated is a challenge, and being creative and thoughtful about fundraising becomes another challenge.
No, we talked a lot about, we have some historians at the table, and then us from the healthcare side of things. And our organization has been here for over 100 years, and we talked about sometimes the thought that people look at us as just an old, kind of stale organization, and in healthcare, obviously, that's not good. We're constantly, progressive. We are a Catholic organization, so we do follow, kind of the guidelines that, the bishops and whatnot have laid out for us. But we don't want to forget where we came from, because where we came from is why we're here now, and why it is we're in the position that we're in. We're, a large healthcare system, and we're going to keep moving forward. And we were talking to the historians about educating the people on where Youngstown was. We all know where we were. We might not know where we're going, but it's important to know where we came from, because it's going to help us move forward, knowing the mistakes that we may have made along the way, or celebrating those successes, as you mentioned before. So that was kind of the overall discussion we had at our table here. Not sure if that translates into a question, but...
No, but I think it's an important point to keep in mind the continuation of institutional knowledge while still preparing for the future, still training emerging leaders, still making sure that they understand the history of the organization so that they can be informed when their time comes to make decisions. They can be informed about the background of the organization.
Well, also, what I hear in that is relevance. Because especially when you think about the institution, the Catholic Church, and what you do in healthcare, you have to make sure you stay relevant. And there are many organizations that are struggling with their relevancy today. The NAACP being one of them. Struggling with how are we today? They feel like we got clearly the events of this past year that we actually still have a role to play in all of this, but what people can't see is the relevance of the organization, the institution. And so telling your story and looking at your history, but with an eye towards, as you just said, the future. How are we relevant to today's discussion on healthcare? How are we relevant to the needs of this community today is really where you need to place that history. Otherwise, when you lose your relevance, you lose your constituency. You lose your constituency, you lose your fundraising. And if you lose your fundraising, then, of course, it's just not helpful. But in addition to just raising dollars, you also have a mission and things that you want to see done. You have a contribution to make. And you actually have to tell people how relevant your contribution is. No one else is going to do that for you. And if you don't tell it, then all they'll do is criticize or think you're not open. Before I became president of the Winthrop Rockefeller Foundation, I actually had folks say, oh, I didn't even know the organization was still open. And so if you're so irrelevant that nobody even knows you're around, that's a problem. And, so you have to tell that story. And again, that storytelling it's really important how to tell the stories of what you guys are doing and how you're contributing to this community. Because if you don't tell it, then no one will know and won't make the links. And it's your responsibility to make that link and to make it relevant. If for nothing else, for your contribution and to build your constituency.
And I think that goes back to the last question about challenges that come up and telling your story through any means possible. Facebook, Twitter, whatever it is, getting that message out to the community through any means. And a lot of organizations are hesitant to do that, as you pointed out. That's a challenge to keep them engaged in telling their story to the community, maintaining that relevance.
And tailoring it. I mean, the population is shifting. The population, at least I can speak for Arkansas, but what I know of some of the region, you have, you know, the baby boomers are aging, so that we will have quite a few folk in retirement on fixed incomes who may not be able to give. But these are former educators, businessmen, lawyers, accountants. I mean, there's your volunteer base, right? So you show relevance in that way. Then you have those who are newcomers, whether they're African, Latino, Eastern Europe, wherever they're coming from, then that becomes a whole new base of folk that you can begin building a constituency around and carry your message. So you have to tailor it there. And then young people just trying to figure out. You know, you have a lot of young people who are socially conscious, they just don't know where and how to do so. And one of the things we have to implore here in Youngstown is before you get to save the children and all them folks that are outside, not that I got anything against them because I'm all supportive, do here first. Support nonprofits and nonprofit leaders here first. And somehow tailoring a campaign or set of messages or the like that gets people to do here first. And appealing to young people in that way. So I don't know how you go about that, but that's the way to consider it. And going about that does not necessarily mean some high-powered PR firm. Some of this stuff you can actually just do yourselves, just by whether it's through social media or whether it's through word of mouth or however it gets done. But, you know, again, we don't take the time to really study how to communicate and what's effective with different audiences. And this may be a point in time in that history where you need to do that so that you can be accountable to folks in terms of the dollars they have committed, but also be relevant so that you can attract new spirits there.
My question to you is, what are some proven ways, in your experience, of bringing those folks together in that room?
What are some proven ways of getting people from a wide cross-section together in the room?
So this was actually asked in a session we had earlier today. And one of the things I would say, again, you have to learn how to communicate to those folks. And there are ways in which you can do it where there are young people, older people, and the like. You just have to know how to communicate with them. And, you know, whether that's through texting, whether that's through meeting with them, talking with them, that's key to it all, right? And the way we may think it happens may not be the way that's effective for it to happen. The other is work with what you have. So if only 5 people are showing up, work with those 5 committed people. Because again, once you show your excellence, your integrity, you mean well, you have a plan, you know where you want to go, and you have some small successes, people come on board after a while. And even with Nehemiah, going back to his example, when he got that wall built with excellence in 52 days, all the folks shut up. They shut right up, they were done. And it didn't bother him nothing because he accomplished his goal. And so when you get excellence, so in Louisiana, one of the ways that we were able to get community organizing funded was the organization I managed, we funded community organizing. And we actually raised money for community organizing. Well, we shamed my colleagues into funding community organizing. Because we started doing it, getting success with it, and then they were embarrassed that they had not been doing it previous to us. And so, you know, you can get people on board. I mean, I'm all for shaming folk now. You can get people on board by setting an example, and through that example, letting them know, look, this will work. But sometimes you got to start with those few, and those few will eventually grow. But you have to be committed and dedicated to it.
Leaders in the audience, and so I'm going to ask LaShonda, Trina, anybody at that table. There's a few folks that I don't know. Would you guys be willing to ask a final brief question before we continue on with the afternoon? I see everybody's looking at each other. Somebody be brave.
This gentleman had
was there one up front?
while the emerging leaders are
Okay.
You're not,
Yeah.
you're
So
not
while you guys are thinking, but so if you question, that's okay, but let me ask you this. Does any of this conversation resonate with you? Maybe we'll do it that way, and that might bring up something for you.
Look at that, I got the microphone. And I was wondering while we were talking about the concept of Ubuntu is very, very important. It's very, very well established.
It's Ubuntu.
Ubuntu, yes. Do you have any thoughts or ideas, however, as to where the other side, the other foot, as it were, of personal responsibility and personal initiative, may also play a role in how people grow and develop and achieve?
Yes, that's absolutely right. And a lot of why there's so much individualism still in the United States is because of personal responsibility, right? And so Ubuntu and grace does not excuse anyone's personal responsibility at all. Folk are responsible. You are responsible for your alcoholism. You are responsible for going to jail. You are responsible for not being in the labor force. You are responsible for whatever it is that you have done that put you in the predicament that you're in. The challenge comes is in a community like Youngstown, when you have about 5,000 people doing that, oh, now it's a problem. And that problem is not a personal responsibility problem, that problem is a community problem. So when you have 5,000 disheartened people in your community, then that means there's some challenges going on in such a way that it's impacting how our economy is functioning, how our school system is functioning, how we're functioning as a whole. So personal responsibility and those who are working on personal responsibility, absolutely, it doesn't excuse it. It absolutely does not excuse it. But if those who are struggling with mental health challenges and Youngstown does not provide mental health services, what's going to happen? If folk are not going to go to college because college is not their thing, didn't enjoy school so much, school's not their thing, but there's no affordable vocational or career ed training for them to go to, and then you got about 3,000 to 4,000 of them, then at some point personal responsibility is a responsibility. But when you have it in mass, it becomes a greater responsibility. That's where Ubuntu comes in. And that's where the challenges in community comes in. When we have disinvested for one reason or another in a community, and in that disinvestment, we then create a situation where folk cannot thrive, we have to take some responsibility for those decisions. If we didn't invest in the education here because all the dollars were going to this other district or this other area because that's where the tax base was, but then you're blaming me or our school for not performing well when we don't have the resources to perform well, well then your personal responsibility argument just went out the window as far as I'm concerned. Investment and investing just becomes vitally important. But so does personal responsibility. So now I'm personally responsible for this horrendous situation that I'm in, that I'm put in by a set of policies and decisions that were made not to invest in my community. But yet I'm supposed to do exceedingly well with exceedingly less. So that's where, yes, it is about personal responsibility. Yes, that low-income set of parents is supposed to work with their young child to read on grade level. Absolutely, that is correct. That is correct. But when we have, and statistics show, that young men of color are not doing well, boys of color are not reading on grade level, then that is a systemic problem. And that's where personal responsibility comes in, but we have to address the systemic problem. And when it's chronic or historical, we have to address it. So that's where they come hand in hand. Yes, personal responsibility is important, but dealing with root causes and systemic change is also important. And that's where Ubuntu comes in, and we're all responsible for that because we're all affected.
Sharing your insights on the journey to organizational excellence and leadership development, and in particular for your very astute insight into Bill Mullane, which I think was very So I thank you. I would like to introduce lead up back to the stage. We're going to do some afternoon announcements and get everybody going.
I need you to still have your clickers. My colleague in all this, Joe Caruso, made me tell an untruth. After our last round of questions, he had one more. So we loaded it, and we're actually breaking down that how you measure your excellence. So we want to look at that. So which measure of excellence do you rely on the most? Data, client satisfaction, community assessment, or anecdotal evidence? This time you have to choose. You can see that the leaders who chose community assessment are the purple and volunteer there. We just wanted to take a quick look at that, and that's going to help us analyze this later. Thank you for indulging me.
Community Foundation of Mahoning Valley, and I am just going to share with you a few reminders and announcements before you head to your next session. First, remember that you'll be receiving an online survey within the next 24 hours. And it's really, really important that you take a few minutes, complete this, and get the information back to the Wean Foundation, because it's the information they use to plan next year's event. So your input is vitally important. Also, remember that your summit registration includes access to our Knowledge Library at the Wean Foundation site, so there'll be more information about the sessions and things that happened here during the seminar, so please take advantage of that opportunity as well. When you complete and finish your last session, please come back to the lobby area outside the Chestnut Room here, where there are materials to share amongst the agencies and between the nonprofits, and a lot of good information for you to gather. And so at this time, we would like you to proceed then on to your afternoon workshops, and thanks for your attention.